Welcome all. We are mindful that this weekend is Memorial Weekend, and we pay homage to those in memory who have died. I am Anita Jenks, the worship leader this morning, and Megan Griffin is our worship associate. Our pianist is Jamie Passman. Hospitality team is led by Jane Foltzer and her team. And our technicians are Jean Schafer and Alex Dvorak. Thank you all. Please join Megan and me as we say our chalice words. Can you read that? Words of love. We gather to seek, to sustain, and to share.
There's always a lot going on around UCH, and you can read all about it in your news and notes, which arrives in your inbox every Friday. If you would like to receive news and notes, you can go to the church's website and click on the Connect button at the top of the homepage. If you are a visitor and would like to receive news and notes, you can put your name in the visitor's book, which is at the visitor's table in the back in the living room. Please join us downstairs after the service for our coffee hour, treats, and casual conversation. If you are a visitor, you can pick up a green mug so we know you're visiting, and we can greet you all. Some announcements for this week. The religious ed classes will take place outside on the lawn this morning. On Monday, the Buddhist meditation group will meet virtually and discuss The Heart of the Buddhist Teaching by Thich Nhat Hanh. On Tuesday, May 27th, the nonfiction book group will discuss a book by Eula Biss, Having and Being Had, a perspective on how the author tries to live out her values in a fast, changing culture where successes and money are priorities. Please access the survey listed in news and notes. Your input is appreciated regarding our ongoing a commitment to social justice and equality. Your responses will be anonymous. There will be a child dedication for William Scalaro Sansone Brennanwood after the service today. He is the grandchild of Sandra Brennan, who was a member here. And next Sunday, June 4th, is our Flower Communion service. It is the 100th anniversary of the Flower Communion, and Unitarian Universalist congregations around the world will be celebrating at this time. Please bring a flower to share for our ceremony. Now Pam will lead us in a story for all ages. Do you have anything? No.
Good morning. So there's no pictures today, so you'll have to close your eyes and use your imagination. The name of my story is The End is Just the Beginning. The end. That's right. You've reached the end and the beginning. But wait. How can a book possibly start with the end? That's ridiculous. Well, prepare to have your mind blown. Because the end isn't really the end, it's just the beginning of something else. Like a beautiful sunset. Sure seems like the end of the day, right? Not so fast. You see, when the sun goes down, it's actually just the beginning of the night. When all the snow melts at the end of winter, that just means it's the beginning of. If you try to go to the ends of the earth, you'll actually just keep going back to the beginning because the earth is one big circle. If you blast off in a rocket ship, you'll reach the end of the sky, otherwise known as the beginning of outer space. When you count, the end of one number is just the beginning of the next number, and so on, and so on, and so on, all the way to infinity, which, by the way, never ends. Even a sign that literally says dead end isn't an end at all. It's only just the beginning of whatever lies beyond it. So when you really think about it, the end is entirely endless. The end of a disagreement with someone is just the beginning of making up. The end of a mistake is just the beginning of learning something new. The end of being sick is just the beginning of feeling better. And the end of dinner is just the beginning of, and if you're really well behaved, the end of dessert might just be the beginning of more dessert. So tonight, when you turn off the lights and you go to bed, don't think of it as the end of anything. Just think of it as the beginning of a new tomorrow, full of possibilities. The beginning of discovering the next book. The end, for real. Thanks for sharing with me. You don't have to sing me out, I'll just.
Please join in singing hymn 318, We Would Be One. Our church is sustained by your pledges and other contributions. Your generosity is appreciated. Please join in saying our offertory words. This church is made up of all of us. It is what we learn together, the work we do together, the fun we have together. It is what we share with one another, with people around us, and with the whole world. Thank you for your generosity.
Please settle in your seats, and let's reflect on a silent moment in time. Let us say to ourselves after me, I breathe in peace.
I breathe in peace.
I breathe out love.
I breathe out love.
I breathe in understanding.
I breathe in understanding.
And I breathe out acceptance.
I breathe out acceptance.
I breathe in life.
I breathe in life.
And I breathe out strength.
And I breathe out strength.
Let us savor this moment of silence. Thank you. Okay, do you want to invite them up?
If you have something dancing or weighing on your heart, you may come up and light a candle. Please remember that we are being broadcast on YouTube, so first names only.
Yeah, so we had a very pleasurable time with my mother for the past week or so, and she's sitting right there. And she's saying it's the last time she'll come to the U.S., but we don't know. But yeah, she's leaving on Tuesday, going back to New Jersey to be with my sisters for a couple of weeks. So it's been a real honor to have her this time.
This is really a matter of joy and correction. I'm Ron. Our next book, nonfiction, is June 23rd. We just had a wonderful discussion this past Tuesday, but it's Having and Being Had is the book, and please join us by Zoom.
And I'm just reading what I was given.
Megan didn't know I was going to come up here and hug her, but we both want to thank all of you for all of your congratulatory remarks and joining us for the party last Saturday. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. We had a lot of fun. Hopefully you did too.
Yes.
We light these last 3 candles. Remembering Memorial Day, we honor those loved ones we have lost in the past year. We honor veterans who have sacrificed their lives fighting in our wars. And we remember the indigenous people who inhabited this land for 11,000 years.
Fences and gates. How did I come to that theme? In March, Paul demolished our fence that has been up for 30 years. He built it 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago, and it has withstood storms and rain and kids running in and out. And having the fence up for 30 years, we were friendly with our neighbors, but not real friendly. We were nice to each other. We said hi to each other. But the fence came down, and so did the neighbors. They came over and helped Paul demolish the fence. Not only that, our neighbor took most of our wood and repurposed it into birdhouses. And we have one birdhouse here for someone. I'll tell you who it is later on. But it opened an idea in my mind about what fences we have in our lives, and that we need gates sometimes to open the fence to a wider world. And I thought about the different types of fences that we have. Can you name a few? We've got wood fences, chain link, picket, stone, invisible, right? Barbed wire, right? Electric, good. Exactly, yes. And I thought about the Berlin Wall, too. We even have plastic fences. Can you believe it? And so some fences are beautiful, and some fences are hurtful, but they are all limiting. It is their purpose. In our daily lives, we are sometimes confronted with our own fence making, roadblocks that limit us in some way. It is finding that opening in the fence, that gate, that will help us find a path to new understandings, new ways, and new ways of thinking, new tools of knowledge that feed our inner life. Going through the gate is like an aha moment. And today we will hear 4 stories from our church members of their experiences as a result of opening that gate and finding the other side of the fence. Our first speaker is Rajat Dawar. And Rajat and Sinve are new members of the church, and she is our church bookkeeper. So we're welcome to have Rajat as our first speaker. And then after him will be Stan Piskorski, Tiffany Schafer, and Darren Howard. Rajat.
Thanks, Anita. Better? So, when I came to the US in 1994, I came for college, and I went to Grinnell, Iowa. It's a very nice, beautiful liberal arts college, as different from India as possible. And I needed friends. I was part of the International Student Organization. We were 90 of us from all different countries. For some reason, I got attracted to a man from Pakistan. He was very charismatic, and the girls loved him, and the men wanted to be like him. So he was a ladies' man and a man's man. So I obviously wanted to be his friend, and so I ended up becoming his friend, and the first semester worked out really well. But then in the second semester, he threw a curveball on me, and I found out that he is a communist who was just learning the capitalist ways in the US and was going to go back to Pakistan and foment a revolution. So he was the works, Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, Stalinist person. And he started to try to brainwash me in that direction. After a year, I realized that I was being brainwashed. But one thing that I did like about him was his logic for being an atheist, which is part of being a Marxist. So I took that home with me, and I was convinced, and I became an atheist. Now, I lived like that. I have been living like that for about 30 years now. And then my jobs took me, I had 20 jobs in 20 years. And they took me all over from New Jersey up to Illinois. And I finally got a job in Chicago. And my wife and I found that we don't have many friends here. So we did meet a couple at the Hindu temple, and they were our friends, but we would meet them like once in 3 months. So that wasn't really doing it for us. And what I figured we really needed was community more than anything. But now, how does an atheist find community? So my first method was to find a church. So my wife and I went to 7 churches in Chicagoland, but of course they were all propounding Christianity and how belief in the gospel can take you to heaven and prevent you from going to hell. And for an atheist, this was creating too much cognitive dissonance for me. So I couldn't really swallow it wholesale. But then I figured, okay, so if I cannot go to a church, then what do I do? So I started watching YouTube videos because I figured that I couldn't be the first atheist who needed community. So I stumbled upon this very good YouTube video in which there was a debate between a person of the Baha'i faith and an Orthodox Christian. So the person of the Baha'i faith said that my prophet is the second coming of Muhammad, and we are kind of Islam 2.0. And that's what we believe, and so are the Christians. You see, there's people like Unitarians who don't even believe in the Trinity. So Christianity is as diverse as what the Baha'i faith makes Islam. So the Orthodox Christian said, well, that's not a good argument because Unitarians are not Christians. They don't believe in the Trinity, so they're not even fair game. So Christians all believe in the Trinity, and Unitarians don't, so they're not Christian. So that was supposed to put me off, but it really turned me on. Because I wanted that for myself. So I believed that Jesus Christ was a human being, as great as he was, but he was still a human being, not the Son of God. And if the Unitarians are saying this, then I should look them up. So I researched what are all the UU churches in Chicagoland, and I found that there's 3 of them. We went to the one in Palatine first, and it was nice. The one in Naperville was meeting online, I think, because of the post-pandemic stuff. So Naperville wasn't an option. But then, as a last attempt, we came to Hinsdale. And Darren was very warm to us. And we felt that this was a place where I would not have any cognitive dissonance. So the fence really was for an atheist to find community, and the fence gate was this UU church.
Rajat, I am a pioneer. I went to Grinnell too, and so did my daughter. Right. That's amazing. We have a couple of others in the congregation who went to Grinnell. Yay. Yes, yes. Okay, our second speaker is Stan Piskorski, and he went on a vacation one time that carried him over the fence from early on.
Just so you know, my first experience with Unitarian was someone said, Unitarians believe in one God, like at the most. So I can totally relate. About a week and a half ago, my wife and I stopped in Buffalo on the way back from visiting Niagara Falls, Ontario. And on a whim, we stopped at the Buffalo and Erie County Naval and Military Park. We were surprised to discover that you could tour 3 World War II era ships, a cruiser, a destroyer, and a submarine. And as we walked through those ships, I felt uncomfortable with how cramped they were and how I didn't really like the smell. That sort of diesel-y smell that permeates any ship that's been around for any length of time. And it made me remember that because of a gate that had closed more than 50 years ago, I was saved from possibly spending up to 5 years on a ship like that one. Kind of shows you that life doesn't really turn out the way you thought it was. So let me take you back to that pre-50 years ago. Like many juniors in high school, I tried to figure out where I was going to college. As the son of a naval officer who had been around Navy bases all my life, it seemed logical that I would try to get an appointment to the Naval Academy or maybe an NROTC scholarship. And I know because we are so military here, I better explain that NROTC is the Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps, and it's a way a lot of people can get into college, get a scholarship to college, and then have to serve another 5 years in the Navy. Well, I was lucky enough to get both. And on July 30th, 1969, I took the oath of office, the oath to be a naval midshipman at Annapolis. I was going to major in ocean engineering, about as naval as I could get. Well, I didn't know it at the time, but it turned out the military was not a good match for me. And by May of 1970, I found myself kicked out of the Naval Academy because my classmates and upperclassmen didn't think I had the right attitude to be a naval officer. Now, how they knew that, since they weren't naval officers, is a little beyond me, but that was the decision. When I walked through that front gate of Annapolis, I had no idea what would be next for me. Almost by chance, I ended up at Marquette University in Milwaukee, one of the schools I'd selected if I'd opted for that NROTC scholarship, and found myself living further from an ocean than I'd ever lived. I've now lived close to Lake Michigan for more than 50 years, and it's not an ocean, but sometimes it feels like one. Life at Marquette was very, very different than the Naval Academy. For one thing, at the Naval Academy, there was a huge brick wall that surrounded the entire campus, a real fence, and with real gates. Marquette was an urban campus with the main drag of town running right through the center of campus. Instead of preparing for war, like we had been at the Naval Academy, remember this was 1970, and there was this little thing going on called Vietnam. And so instead of preparing for war, most of my classmates, most of my friends were arguing against it, perhaps protesting, and trying to figure out how they could protest to get out of exams. I stayed in engineering for one semester and realized I really didn't understand calculus. So I switched to business and managed to stay as a business major until I ended up graduating, and I ended up not having to get drafted, which was a good thing because I had a low number. But I didn't even have to tell them I had bone spurs. It was probably a good thing, because if I couldn't make it in the Navy, how in the world would I have survived in the Army? Well, it turns out I had a knack for business, especially selling. And after 10 years of doing all different kinds of selling, I found myself as a sales trainer, a job that I've been doing for 35 years and continue to do today. So if that gate hadn't closed behind me, and it was a big gate, I would never have lived in the Midwest. I certainly wouldn't have all the relationships I have today, and it's unlikely that I would have chanced onto the career that I have thoroughly enjoyed. You know, the first reference to the quote, "When one door shuts, another opens," was Cervantes in Don Quixote, a book I've never read nor ever seen the play, but I have always found it to be true. And in this case, that's one door I'm glad shut behind me.
When I approached Tiff about doing this talk, we both agreed that the topic was a great fit given her love of animals and her work in animal rights. Today, Tiff will speak about her mental fences in her youth that confined the way she viewed animals and the gate that opened her mind to a broader thinking.
Good morning. When I was a kid, my favorite place to go was the zoo. I've had a lifelong fascination with animals. The closer I could get to see them or pet them, the better. Without consciously realizing or admitting I was doing so, though, I regarded animals as existing solely for my pleasure. My viewing pleasure, the pleasure I derived from petting them, and even the enjoyment from wearing clothes or eating food made from them. One day as a child, I noticed something strange on one of my regular visits to the zoo with my family. A polar bear in a small enclosure would walk forward, bobbing his head up and down, and then just start walking backward, doing the same head bob. He would repeat this pattern over and over and over, and I can only assume all day long for the most part. It was so sad. Other kids would kind of point and laugh, amused at the little moonwalk-like choreography of the bear, which was in vogue in the 80s when I was a kid. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right even then. I realized that the bear was in an enclosure far different from what he'd experienced in the natural world, and this seemed to be linked somehow to his erratic and neurotic movements. I somehow managed to dismiss the thought, though, and not reconsider the topic for many years, keeping my mental fences upright. I began thinking about the plight of animals again when I was in college. One day when I was walking to class, minding my own business, the Animal Rights Club was handing out PETA leaflets, promoting the next club meeting for the Animal Rights Club. I took a leaflet, and my jaw dropped in horror right there on the quad when I saw the graphic images of animals being slaughtered for food. I decided to attend one of the club's meetings to learn more about what I was seeing in the leaflet. Is this really what I'd been paying for when I bought a fast food burger? I decided then and there that I would stop eating meat, even though I enjoyed the taste, so that I wouldn't contribute to the suffering that I saw pictured in the leaflet. I then attended the club's annual Thanksgiving party and had my first introduction to tofurkey, which would be a lifelong love for me. However, I did continue wearing clothing made out of animal products and eating milk and eggs. The gate in my mental fence was unlocked and slightly ajar. It wasn't until many years later, when I joined this church, in fact, that I progressed my views of animals further to where I'm at today. A church friend named Jerry emailed me a video from the organization called Mercy for Animals about the mistreatment of dairy cows. Reluctantly, I watched, knowing it was likely to be unpleasant, and I typically would have sheltered myself from having to witness such things. But when I watched the undercover video and saw a baby cow being torn from his mother and kicked repeatedly for no reason, seemingly, I decided to go vegan on the spot and gave up any remaining animal products that I was using in my life. My mental gate swung wide open and has remained that way ever since. Knowing what I know and seeing what I've seen, I could never imagine going back to using animal products, understanding that their use and suffering caused by it is unnecessary and archaic in my view. And through my efforts through groups such as Animal Ministry, I do my best to share my cognizance of this issue with others, meeting them where they are with kindness and compassion, such in the same way that the Animal Friends club that I was in college met me where I was emotionally and mentally. And as much as I enjoyed it as a kid, I have not been back to the zoo since. If you ask a vegan whether they regret anything about their choice to go vegan, almost universally they will tell you they regret not doing it sooner. Nobody should have to sleepwalk through life on autopilot. Living mindfully and consciously examining the impacts of your choices and viewpoints is the best way I've found to tear down those mental fences that are built up by habit, tradition, convenience, and perceived necessity, and open the gate to love and compassion. Thank you.
Years ago, someone asked me, and I think it was you, Karen, how I felt about animals, and was I tending toward vegetarianism because of my feelings about animals? And I said, not really. This was years ago. And thank you, Tiffany, for allowing your views to spread in this church, because I have come a long way. Paul and I are trying to eat less meat and trying to think more about animals as precious things in our world. In fact, in our family, our kids have dogs, and they had to put one dog down after 14 years. And it's hard. It's been a real companion for that family, for our family. Thank you. Our last speaker is Darren Howard, and Darren has crossed the fence after being a juror.
Thank you, Anita, and thank you, Anita, for the opportunity to share my story, which I also want to thank Carol Doty. I don't know if she's here today, but she's been a big help in developing multiple versions of a rather complex story, but you get the Reader's Digest condensed version today. So in 2018, I was engrossed in my doctoral research and struggling with family health problems. I received a jury notice. Normally, I would have been excited because I was about the only person I knew who had never been asked to be on a jury. I thought my time had come, but why now when I'm this busy and family is not doing well? So I was determined to get out of serving as a juror. But I later found there was no way out. My doctor couldn't write a note, nothing would work. So I was about to move from the never been a juror side of the fence through the gate and into the court of conscience. Grumbling, 2 weeks later, I entered the court building and I took my seat among the other candidates for the jury selection proceedings. I pretty much tuned out, thinking about my schoolwork, and listened only for something that I thought might help me be excused from serving on the jury. But that all changed when the official began describing the case to us. We were given identifying information about the defendant and his circumstances, and that's when I really paid close attention to the detailed police report of the alleged crime and a thorough description of the defendant. The events had supposedly occurred about 3 years earlier, were described as local police intercepting a trespasser and burglar. The suspect was described as a black man from another state. The events occurred in a predominantly white suburban community, commonly perceived as very Christian and conservative. Once we got into the trial, we were told that the defendant, who I will call Reggie, had the permission of homeowner number 1 to enter that homeowner's property and dismantle a shed that homeowner number 1 had sold to Reggie. However, another homeowner number 2 across the street from homeowner number 1 saw Reggie's truck and trailer out front of homeowner number 1's house. And he saw Reggie go into the backyard and into the shed of homeowner number 1 with his tools in hand, and because it was dark, a flashlight mounted on top of his head. Now, I'm not sure about you, but if I were about to burglarize a home, I wouldn't park out in front, or would I wear a head-mounted flashlight? But because homeowner number 1 was out of town, homeowner number 2, the neighbor, called the police and reported he had seen a black man enter his neighbor's property, possibly to burglarize the home and shed. Well, we would later learn that 6 patrol cars arrived and 6 officers with their guns drawn entered the backyard. The report stated that one of the officers ordered Reggie to exit the shed with his hands above his head. Reggie, stating he had permission, complied and came out of the shed. Confident he could talk his way to a peaceful resolution, Reggie assured the officers he had permission to be there. And having been a police officer himself, Reggie suggested that the officers follow protocol and stand down. Yet the defendant reported that next thing he remembered was writhing on the ground with sharp pains in his abdomen. He had been tased. At this moment, it became apparent, at least to me, if not to the other jurors, that this case was not going to be as cut and dried. Would it be about the response of the police, or about the alleged offenses of a black man, or something else? On day 1 of the trial, I was struck by Reggie's appearance. He was a middle-aged, small-statured black man with salt and pepper buzz-cut hair, sharply dressed, as you should for when you're on trial, I suppose. Later in the testimony, we would learn that he was an enlisted veteran, and he had been married to the same woman for 20 years, raising their 7 children on their farm. He had also been a military policeman. He was a rock-solid citizen, contributing wholly and completely to his family and society. Not to mention that he greatly resembled one of my all-time best friends. But that's another facet of this story that is for another time. Now that I had heard the facts, or at least the details, and identified with the defendant, I was hell-bent on becoming a member of that jury. So back to jury selection. I looked around and assessed the other candidates, hoping there would be African-American representation. I was glad to see an African-American woman and 2 young African-American men in the candidate pool. I thought to myself, we got to get those 2 black guys on that jury. Unfortunately, the first black man told his truth when he was asked if he felt law enforcement and the judicial systems treated minorities fairly. No, he said. He spoke his truth, his personal truth. He was dismissed. For some reason, the black woman was gone. I don't remember what circumstances led to her not being selected, leaving the only other black candidate, a 22-year-old male, who told the truth about his history with substance abuse, which I wondered how the attorney questioning the jurors could have known, again dismissed. In the end, more than 3/4 of the jury appeared to be middle-class or affluent Caucasian West suburbanites. There were 2 minorities, an Indian man and an Asian woman. I'm sorry, 3, and a Mexican woman. Later, in the juror room, each candidate shared a little about themselves. All seemed good until a sharply dressed woman across from me spoke. In her tailored designer outfit, white linen pants, red shoes, a red jacket, and red and white neck scarf, and lots of bling, Red Suit Lady, I now call her, eloquently introduced herself as a homemaker living with her husband and children in a town that will remain unmentioned, but one of the wealthiest nearby suburbs. I immediately determined her to be not only affluent, but a white privileged person and possibly a racist. To her left were two more well-dressed women who also stated that they lived in affluent western suburban communities. I made a gulping sound, thinking a fair trial for Reggie might be difficult. And now back to the trial. The prosecution's opening statements were a bit damning of Reggie. Their words portrayed him as a thug, a trespasser, and a thief. I noticed other jurors shared my discomfort with the accusations against him because of all the wonderful things we had heard about him. However, the defense's opening statements were much more compelling and succeeded in presenting Reggie in the light of fairness, objectivity, and reality. Hours of testimony followed, and the police officers executing the arrest were brought to the stand, at which time the judge made it very clear to the jury the police officers are not on trial. Yet the defense still postured itself to illuminate possible mishandling by the police officers. I was finding objectivity difficult that day, and I didn't sleep well that night, worrying about the outcome for Reggie, even though it seemed abundantly clear to me, and I think the rest of the jurors, that he had been wrongfully accused. On day 2 of the trial, we learned that Reggie would be taking the stand in his own defense. I had mixed feelings about that, and so did my colleagues. But it really seemed that he had nothing to hide, nothing to lose, and only to gain. You'll be glad to hear that Reggie was his own star witness. Then deliberations began, of which I remember little, except I distinctly recall my surprise when Red Suit Lady spoke, and she insisted on speaking first. I held my breath, thinking she was going to throw Reggie to the wolves. Instead, she emphatically stated, "It's so obvious to me that this guy did absolutely nothing wrong except be a black man in unfortunate circumstances." Victory for Reggie, I thought to myself. In the end, all but one juror agreed about the mishandling of Reggie's arrest. And it was now time for us to return to court with our verdict. The courtroom was very quiet, and it was time for our jury foreperson to speak, and we had unanimously selected Red Suit Lady. I found myself trying to make eye contact with the observably nervous Reggie so I could communicate to him that he was going to be acquitted. Never made eye contact. Then confidently and righteously, if not proudly, Red Suit Lady stated, "Not guilty, not guilty, not guilty." I found myself wanting to stand up and applaud. Reggie's expression, seeming to almost faint and fall out of his chair, was really moving. One of the other affluent women was wiping tears from her eyes. I felt horribly guilty for having judged her and Red Suit Lady by their appearance and grace as possibly being racist. Of course, I felt a great sense of relief and justice for Reggie. Yet more compelling for me that day than Reggie's acquittal was my personal reckoning that my previous notion that a wealthy white person might automatically assume the guilt of a minority defendant. That gave me renewed hope that one day we will fully heal from centuries of racism. I still occasionally think of Reggie and wonder how he's doing with his shed, but more often I think of Red Suit Lady as the unexpected hero of my tale. She changed my perceptions. I can now walk through Hinsdale, and yes, Red Suit Lady was from Hinsdale. And I no longer immediately prejudge a seemingly affluent person as being racist, based only on their apparent status, where they live, or their whiteness. This is the gate I passed through that day, hopefully never to return to the other side of that fence. Thank you.
Thank you all. That was wonderful. Here is a short excerpt from a poem by Robert Frost. Fences. Before I build a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out. and to whom I was likely to give offense. And sometimes we have to think that maybe we're giving ourselves offense, but it's something to think about. The stories we have heard today are stories about all of us. Who hasn't felt the hurdles of being on one side of the fence? It is the gate's invitation that allows us to discover what is on the other side of the fence. As we glean more and more of what is on the other side, we are nudged into a wide vantage of understanding and new awareness. And once we are through, how free and purposeful we must feel for this new gestalt. Thank you, Rajat, Stan, Tiffany, Darren, for your insights. They will help us in our own paths. Please join in singing hymn 346. Marcus, and I can't pronounce his middle name, Vero, was a 1st century BC Roman polymath. And he said this: "The longest part of the journey is said to be passing through the gate." We will extinguish our chalice now. Well, let's see.
I can't read that.
Okay. We extinguish this light, but not the light of its truth, the warmth of this community, or the fire of the commitment. These we carry in our hearts and share with all the world. Thank you.
It's Memorial Day. I'm wearing white, so clearly I'm not